Anthony, what's going on, man? So just want to review over this Excel spreadsheet that I attached in your email just to get you a little bit familiar with it. So all this stuff right in here, right, all these blue links, these are all hyperlinks for you to click on. So if you have anything that you're not exactly quite sure on, or I may not have gotten the point across as well as I should have in the video analysis, feel free to click on those. Now, when we go through all this, I'll probably just touch on the yellows and the reds. I'm not going to touch on the greens at all, right? So just things that are possible issues or definite red flags. But then for your player comp, right, I got you linked up with CJ Wilson, and we'll refer back to his video as well as your videos that you sent in as well. So let's just go ahead and get into it. There's CJ there. Okay, now when you start out, your starting position, like how you're setting yourself up with your feet and your posture and everything, hopefully you can see that. There you go. Everything seems to be good from that end, right? But the only thing that I have an issue with is your leg lift and initial weight shift, which in turn kind of affects your tempo and how fast you're moving down the mound, right? You might have heard your coaches say probably like, hey, like you're probably going too slow to the plate, or things like that. And sometimes some lefties do have that issue, just from them like having to check and look at the guys over at first base and stuff like that too. But again, there's multiple factors in there. If you want to move as quickly as you can down the mound, you got to have a good weight shift, right? Like it's not something where you're just falling or that you're stuck over your front side, right? So we'll take a look at yours, right? Well, so we'll back this up to when you're starting out, right? So everything's good from the starting position there, right? And then as you're lifting up, right here at peak leg lift, you're just now starting to move forward, right? So you can kind of see that. But your leg lift is like very straight, right? You could actually kind of pull that in just a little bit towards that throwing shoulder and kind of help you move down towards the mound and drift forward, right? So, as you're lifting, you don't really start to go forward until that front leg starts to come down. And even then, right, you've only gone to here. You haven't really came down and through the mound just yet, right? So you're kind of just going from here and then squatting down versus going here. And then as you're going, everything should be going, boom, towards home plate, right, towards that catcher. Right, so if you want to take a look at old CJ's here, right, as he's lifting, right, you can even see it here. He coils a little bit, but as he's lifting, and then before he even, or really as he starts to come down, he's already moving down towards the mound, right? So again, that's why I gave you yellow on that one. Back leg side of things, your green, your rear glute is engaged, but you do kind of overextend and push with that back leg, right? So you want this back hip and the back knee to rotate down versus jumping and extending out like that, right? So if we take a look at yours from this position, right, come right here, right, you're engaging that rear glute good, but then all of a sudden everything's really straight in here. And you can even see it in this view on that side where everything's just kind of very extended and pushing, which I think is due to how you're pivoting off of your back foot. I'll get into that in a second too. But again, so we can look at CJ's here. Notice how his back leg is rotating down and it's not extending, right? Very similar to a hitter's, right? He's holding that internal rotation here, and then that back hip is pulling everything through this way, right? That back hip and that back knee are driving everything through. Now, on to the next one here, right? Do you have a vertical shin angle, or do you go into early hip internal rotation? You don't go into early hip internal rotation, right? So you hold the vertical shin there. And again, this is something that depends on your hip mobility, on where you need to be holding it, right? But you're kind of holding this position right here for a good amount of time, so that's a green on my book, right? Now, do you stay in your heel, not rise on your toes early? You don't do either one of those, but you don't pivot through your midfoot, which is probably something we need to touch on a little bit. So looking at your video, right, it looks like you're coming from here and then coming up onto your toes like this, and then everything is extending and going like that, versus kind of pivoting through this Adidas sign, or like maybe even right here closer to the heel, right? So you're gonna come in, evert with your foot this way, and then come through, right? You can do that too soon as well, but as you're going down the mound and you're holding that internal rotation, as that back hip's coming through, you shouldn't go towards the ball of your foot and then jump and extend. It should be like this, okay? So hopefully you can see that. We'll take a look at your video here, right? So if we look, you see how your foot doesn't really want to evert, and it pivots off that big toe there, right? Now if we look at good old CJ, you can see it. Unfortunately, we can't see his front foot in this one, but you can see how he's moving through this part, right? That foot bone and everything is able to move and pivot around that way. All right. Now, when we get into the directionality of your drive, that's a green. Everything's going towards home plate. You're not landing too closed or too open. Or even if you landed that way, you could still take everything towards home plate, right? But you want to take all your momentum, right, forward, move, everything's going that way. So that is a green. You don't come out of your drive early. You have good lateral versus vertical ground reaction force. Obviously, we don't have a ground reaction force plate mound, but from here, right, this is vertical, this is lateral, and you want to be somewhere right in between. Boom, I already touched your shin right there with that line. So you're good on that end, right? The only thing would be like if you were trying to hold a vertical shin and you were staying too vertical with your line, or you kind of like went off to this side, which you'd be quad dominant if you did, and would get too lateral, but you don't do either one of those. So just wanted to touch on that, even though that was a green. Now, does your back knee drive down into landing? I think it does, but it's not necessarily getting there the right way, so that you can see how from these frames it's starting to extend at this point, like right after, versus having the back hip go boom and opening it up, right? So this front, we'll get into the front leg in a minute, but the front leg kind of opens everything up and then that knee drives down versus the knee, that back knee driving everything open, right? You probably heard that from old Randy at the ranch too. So now when we get to foot maintains contact at release, right? So very misunderstood concept. You don't necessarily have to roll to your pinky toe or anything like that. It's really just a result of how well you use that back hip, right? The only thing is being if it comes completely off the ground, that just tells us that this back hip hasn't rotated all the way through yet. But when we get to ball release for you, you know, it's still in contact with the ground and then it comes up after, so you're green, okay? Now we get to the pelvis, right? Are your hips clear into landing? So as soon as you land, boom, with that front foot, your hips should be facing towards home plate, right? Like this. Can't really see them in the video, but they're facing this way, and then your shoulders are back this way, versus kind of lacking hip shoulder separation or moving independently of your torso, which yours kind of moves together. That's why I gave you red of no segmentation, right? So it's kind of all coming together as one big chunk together. So your hips and your pelvis going like this versus going pelvis, then this, right? Pelvis, then torso, pelvis, then shoulders. Okay, does it rotate down versus spinning into landing? I don't think it spins at all, right? You want from this position for that back hip to rotate into the front leg, and that's actually what creates your lead leg block or that lead leg extension, is from this rotating efficiently down that way. It's not something you're trying to necessarily do independently. So again, that was green, so you're good. Now for the torso side of things, so taking the pelvis out, right, we're thinking waist up from here. Okay, do you have excessive counter rotation? No, you're good, you're green. Do you have early torso rotation? Yes. Due to your lack of segmentation, right, when you're here like this. It's not a red where you're like landing completely with your chest open, but you're still, I can still kind of see that front part of your logo on that shirt, right? So right here, and that, right, that one's kind of, it's facing this camera at least. So like it's not like full blown, but it's like right here, okay? In this view, in the rear view, it looks like you kind of already opened up. So it might vary pitch to pitch too. Now versus like, look, you can see through this in CJ's, that belt buckle's here, right? And so you can actually see the turns in a shirt, right? You can see that shirt kind of twist this way, right? And you see the folds in a shirt where he's actually getting that pull throughout his trunk. Right? Now when we, getting back into the trunk here. So again, circling back, torso doesn't segment from pelvis, right? You could still have hip shoulder separation, but when we say segmentation, just want to clarify this a little bit more, right? Your pelvis goes, then the lumbar spine. Each segment rotates and travels all the way up through here, up into the arm, right? So pelvis, lumbar, T-spine, up through the T-spine, boom, into the arm, okay? Versus going like that, right? That's lacking segmentation. When everything's moving as one big block. Now, Bowflex bow, this is a concept we got from Paul Nyman. Basically, as you're going down the mountain, you want to have some bow in your torso, and then when you land, thoracic extension, or chest out row rotating, right? Whatever you want to call it. And then after you rotate through, you're gonna have some more bow on that one. And your last bow is actually kind of missing, in my opinion, right? So you're coming through here, and you got good bow coming down this way. But once you land, right, you get that good thoracic extension through here. But then after you come through, everything kind of forward folds like this. And you want to make sure that you're continuing to rotate around and have some bow throughout your torso for that one, right? So if we look at good old CJ here, right, it's kind of hard to see from this angle, but he does have good bow, gets good thoracic extension, and then after he finishes, right, you can see this, how he's continuing to rotate around versus you going this way, getting kind of linear with it, right? So that's why the Bowflex bow is yellow. Now we get into the scapular dig and the reflexive pec fire. This is actually whenever we first start to talk about the arm. So obviously we'll get into the arm segment where it's talking about the limb itself, but your arm actually starts at your collarbone, right? So right in here, and then on the flip side of that, right, is your scap. The collarbone and everything kind of attaches there. So those muscles that are around that is your pec. Obviously your scap's back here, right? So we'll talk about the scapular dig part. It's a lot different than scapular loading, where guys are really trying to like forcefully do it or muscle back and get into those positions, muscling up, right? Is not exactly what we want to do. The dig portion is what we get this term from the javelin community, where you get this digging component, right? As your torso is starting to rotate, that scap posteriorly tilts or digs, right, into that. Hopefully you can see this, right? So it digs back here like this as you're initiating rotation. So on the flip side, what else has to happen right here for the antagonist muscle? You have to stretch through your pec, right? So get a full on stretch, and then this acts as a rubber band, boom, whips your arm action through, like that, right? So you're driving through your torso, not with your elbow or, you know, with just your arm, okay? So again, with you lacking scapular dig, you don't get full pec stretch, and again, those are probably, I'd have to further assess you to make sure that's, you know, if it's something restriction going on in there, or if it's just lack of motor control and not being able to get there. So if we look at your torso here, right, so looking at this angle, right, like you kind of get there with your humerus, and we'll get into this a little bit, but you're lacking horizontal abduction, right? So you can't see my arm now, so that'd be kind of even. Now you can see it, and there's space, so you can see the screen, right? Versus just being here would be like yellow, red would be like nothing. Okay, but again, if you lack that dig, you're not going to get much stretch through there. And you can see how your shirt is just kind of like back here like this, but there's no stretch, kind of like how CJ's did. Of course, his shirt was tucked in too, but again, your shirt's just kind of being left behind because everything's going like this versus that thing twisting. It's really hard to see black on black, but I can go over that on the call tomorrow. Now, just to move on from this, we get to reflexive pec fire. Arm slot matches torso rotation. Okay, so right in here, we're gonna look at your shoulders, and we're expected to see that arm slot come out from your torso rotation, right? So whether you're here, if you're a lower 3/4 guy, like boom, right? Your arm slot should match your torso like this, right? But if we look, and you can even see this on the rear view too, we'll go a few frames deep, right? You still haven't quite released the ball yet in this middle one, but you can notice how your forearm is above there. Your humerus is in line, right? All that's good. But then this is up here, which is due to you pushing with your arm for these last few frames, and your hand's actually kind of supinated too. Hopefully you can see that, right? So you can see that the ball is like on this side of your hand. So you're feeling like this, unless this is an off-speed pitch, but I'm seeing this in just about almost all your throws, right? Even in here, right? I'll get into that in a minute, but that hand is like this, which is gonna cause a lot of your balls to cut because you can't necessarily get behind like a fastball like this. You're coming around it, which could probably why you vary from 84 to 88 versus like 86 to 88, because a lot of your fastballs could be cut fastballs. So that's just some observations that I've saw through your videos with that. Do you rotate perpendicular to spine? Right, so do you rotate, here's your spine like this. You're kind of slamming forward again a little bit like this with your trunk. Everything's coming forward like that. I call it an ab slam. We're just going like this versus continually rotate around. And again, it's not something you should force. It's a byproduct of accelerating and getting into these positions correctly, and then that'll help you go through a lot better. Now for excessive tilt, kind of rotation, you don't do that, so you're green. Now, throwing uphill or shoulder tilt, you're kind of even with your shoulders at front foot plant. Right, so we'll scoot this back a little bit. Right, your shoulders are kind of uphill at this point, but then you don't really get to that full weight bearing until here. But if we drew a line, right, they're kind of somewhat even to slightly uphill. It could just be you're throwing glove side, but if you're throwing uphill like this, then you have to go from this position to then this way to try to throw down the mound. Right, you want to be here or slightly downhill. CJ Wilson actually does a really good job of this. Right, let's scoot this back a little bit. So at his weight bearing foot plant right here, right, you can see, come on, work with me here. Right, these next couple frames, again, we can't really see his front foot there, but you can see how he's slightly tilted downhill, down through the slope of the mound. And then all he has to do is just get really direct with this. And you've probably heard this term before, the drive line of his arm is very straight towards home plate. Okay, so now if we track yours, since we're already on that topic, right, we'll get into the throwing arm section of things since that was the last one. I'll come back to this, but let's track your arm path, right? So if you look right here, this is where you're at. Might be there, okay? So here's your elbow again. And now it's up here. And then you have to start working your way back down in for release. All right, so if you can't see that, here's your arm path, right? It starts kind of low, and then it goes like this, low to there, due to the slight uphill tilt that you have. Now, if you corrected that, you could be very direct, right? And just take everything this way. You won't have to waste much energy of trying to get everything back online. Instead of like staying here, if you just rotated with this slight tilt, you basically launch that ball over the backstop, right? So again, if you started here, right? So if your tilt was here and your arm was here, then everything would be able to go along this line. And it wouldn't have to climb up. Your elbow kind of climbs and pushes a little bit, right? So versus CJ's, let's take a look. He gets good pec stretch, and then everything is just very linear and really downhill. Right? So he starts here, and it basically just kind of follows suit on down towards the mound there. Okay, now when we get to the elbow push in a second, arm swing captures momentum. We'll back it on up for the one yellow that you had at the beginning. So right in here at handbrake, you get kind of intentional with your hands kind of just coming like this. They're very straight. Versus, not saying that you have to come up over your head or anything like that, but the old school guys, the Nolan Ryans and guys who like to come over their head, they figured something out where they're using this hand of being up here to capture this downswing motion, right? Wherever you break their hands, you're capturing this momentum to help you get into this flipped up position versus forcefully trying to pull it up. Use momentum on your side to help you get into that and rotate into it. But for you, it looks like you're kind of like breaking back here, and then your arms are staying really straight, right? Very straight, and then your trap has to get involved. Right? We're looking at this video over here, by the way, so you can see that. Right, so right in here, trap gets involved, and then it comes around, right? And even on this pitch, which looks like a fastball, you can see your hand is still over here, like that. Okay, so again, it's really hard to say like that you're definitely not having any momentum, and whether that makes a difference or not could be from like if you have later early flip up, or what they call it at the ranch, like forearm play, early or late forearm play, whatever you want to call it, right? But CJ doesn't do it, but he does a really good job of being on time and actually keeping it just flexed through the downswing, so you can still keep it flexed, like he comes here and then it flips up, but you go straight and then has to come back up. So could be a little bit of just your arm trying to buy time due to the lack of tempo and speed down the mound too. Again, there's multiple variables involved in this, but again, it just seems like you're very intentional and straight versus being very fluid with it. Okay, all of these, right, you've probably gone over at the ranch. You don't overly pronate or supinate. You don't overly extend or flex. Right, are your elbows in line with your shoulders? They are, but since your tilt's this way, right, it looks like it's low, but it's really not. It's just a upper tilt. You have good on-time flip up, maybe slightly late depending on if your foot's slid or not. And your elbow flexion at 90 plus or minus 10 degrees is really good. Let me show you this part that I was talking about where your foot was slipping. So right here, right, boom, you see how that forearm hasn't completely flipped up, where you want it to be here, and it's like in here, okay? And it looks like you're weight bearing foot plane there, but then you slide forward some, and then it's flipped up, which could be just due to the dirt and your cleats, but you're like sliding in with your front foot. Again, I'll come back to the front foot, or the front leg here in a minute. Now, going back to this, full scap retraction abduction. Again, due to your torso, right, due to some of this stuff being tight, you probably physically can't retract back any more than what you already are. So you're gonna need some further assessment to be able to tell what we need to attack for that. Okay, and then arm drag, it doesn't drag, it's kind of really more pushing, but you don't have limited layback. I don't think it's inhibiting your layback at all. But let's get to this elbow push forward thing here, right? So getting back to the torso, if you're getting your pec involved in that, the pec stretch drives everything and then the arm comes right around, versus if the pec's not involved, or if you're moving as one solid chunk like this, right, then what's gonna lead is your elbow, and that elbow is coming in front of your pec. And guess what's taking all that stress? Boom, right there in that elbow, okay? So you can definitely see it in your videos once you get to the later frames. Right in here, possibly could be, but again, we still see some little bit of like fold in your shirt there. So it's not like it's necessarily fully on stretched. And then right here in this frame, you can definitely see that that elbow is leading forward versus the pec, and then this spirals out this way. Okay, so that's why I gave you a yellow for that one. And then elbow straight, again, you're kind of flexed and neutral at release. Right, so at ball release, come on. Right, so again, we talked about being in the slot here. The elbow is in flexion due to that elbow push, and that hand is also here. Right, so if you straighten this out and straighten this out here, just at ball release, right, like you're still flexed here, and then everything else spirals out this way, like that. Okay, hopefully you're getting the feel for what should actually be happening versus here, right, or in your case here, like that. So you have to be like perfectly in time to just throw a straight fastball and not cut it. Could be also due if you're doing your plyos, you're not very conscious of it and you're throwing it directly in front of you, you could be cutting it too, just for the compensation of trying to throw it in a particular area. But I'd have to see video of your plyos to say that that's actually the case, right? And then does your arm work independently of your torso? Again, talked about this before, just like you need hip shoulder separation or segmentation, you also need the pec and the arm to be separate, right? It needs to be different. Different motions. All right, now to the glove side. Do you have early supination or swimming supination, meaning when your thumb starts to go like this, point and turn this way. It's just slightly early, man. Like, I don't think it's that terrible. Right, you're like already here and then starting to point up, and you haven't quite gotten to front foot plant yet, right? Really don't want to see that thing turn over and supinate until your torso starts to rotate, okay? And then also, same thing, this glove side needs to retract just as your throwing arm retracts. This happens first with your throwing arm, and then this retracts here with the glove side, right? So boom, boom, and it gives you something firm to rotate into. Why thumb down? Again, it just kind of keeps your fascial lines really tight in here and keeps this side firm, versus if it's already supinated, that's also a contributor to early torso rotation versus being here. Boom, right? Lot more energy being transferred to the arm versus kind of off to the side if you're already supinated there. So that's it for your glove arm. It does work in opposition with everything, and it rotates into the plantar shoulder rotation. You're not like throwing like this or anything, blocking yourself off. Now into the lead leg, right? It does swing open, right? And I'll just say it for some time saving things here, but I want you to look at your back leg, right? This kneecap is still faced towards this camera view, or in this case over here, in this case this way, right? But your foot is already starting to open, which tells me that this front pelvis is already opening, right? The foot kind of tells you where the hip is, but the hip also, right, the foot is kind of going where the hip is, right? Unless you were like really torquing in your tibia right in there, which you're not, right? But again, like with these frames, that kneecap's still there. So that's telling me that this front leg's swinging open and acting independent versus the back leg, like I talked about before, the back leg, the back hip, right? You're holding that internal rotation, and then that is opening your front leg versus you reaching out independently or swinging open. Okay, so that's why that's a yellow. I've seen worse. Okay. Front foot contact was a green, right? Kind of landing more like this, maybe a little bit onto your heel. Just don't land on your toes and don't land pronated with your foot, but everything seems to be having good. Foot plant from above, right? And then paw back mechanism, this is a yellow just due to, right, like when you're right here, you're slipping forward, and then as you're coming into ball release, this leg flexion has stayed the same, versus if you're gonna have that extension, right, due to this hip pelvis rotating through and then everything comes this way, right, you should already be at this point, or leg extension, before ball release, not after, right? So you're still folded, you're still bent, everything's going, and then you come forward versus going, right? You want to use that energy to come up in through your arm to your advantage. So that's why that is a yellow, but it doesn't wobble to first or third in the transverse plane, and it doesn't wobble forward or backwards in the frontal plane. So you're green on those. Now for the decel, man, being a former ranch guy, I'm kind of disappointed from the decel side of things. So when you come here, right, and it could also be due to you supinating like this too. But once you let go, right, you can see this in a few frames, like your forearm does pronate well. So it does this, right? But your shoulder kind of gets internally rotated, and then everything starts to straighten like this. And your scap, right, it's the last thing that some people think about, but the scap needs to protract forward. This is retract, this is protract. So it needs to come through here and then dissipate that energy down and through the lat, down and through the rest of the trunk, right? And again, your shoulder's still here. Get that bad boy to flex and rotate around more and just have a slight bend. CJ does a really good job of this. So we'll take a look at his, right? So as he's let go of the ball, boom, everything's there. His scap comes forward, right? And then you can kind of see that W, almost see his 3 or 2 in the back part of his video. Again, comparing you to CJ Wilson in his prime, now when he was getting raped, all right? Now when we get to, again, I touched on thoracic rotation And the recoil arm slam is everything straightening out, right? That's the slam, right? But you don't like rebound or anything like that, which the recoil I'm okay with if you use your trunk. If you do this, right? See how my trunk and my arm are moving kind of the same versus going like that, right? Very abrupt and just giving a lot of stress to your shoulder, man. Like, it's just not ideal, right? Now, some miscellaneous stuff that we really don't know where to put throughout this checklist is your overall tempo, right? So I talked about this before. Due to your forward move, your tempo is slow in the 27 range, right? The really elite guys who have really good tempo, like your DeGroms, your Strowmans, guys like that, they're going to be in that 19 to 20 range. Yours is a 27. I'll show you that through this video too. So at peak leg lift, when you start to go down, so right there, we start to count frames until ball release. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24, 25, 26, 27, in that range, okay? Again, totally due on the type of video that we have here. So that's still red in my book. Like a yellow would be like 22 to 24. Some guys can still get away with that and be efficient. But 27 is way too slow. Got to move faster down the mountain there. And again, that bounces back to the very first thing. If you get that forward move right, that leg lift and initial weight shift, that'll definitely help that out. Now, overall rhythm, gave you a yellow, so like this is how everything's working together, right? So if this goes together, right, and you're not like coming through here or moving as one solid chunk, right? It's kind of like more, you've seen the Hispanic guys, right, where they're just kind of moving around and being real loose with everything. Like, that's rhythm. That's the fluidity of your movement versus having abrupt, right, really hard slams and stuff like that. Now, properly timed intent. I'm going to ask you this on our call, Anthony. Like, where do you feel like you're just rearing back and throwing it? Like, is it as you're breaking your hands? Is it like when you're driving down towards the mound? Do you wait until front foot plant to really like turn on that last gear? Or is it like this last little bit right there? Not trying to put words into your mouth. Just let me know where you feel the energy the most whenever you're throwing, okay? Now, the very last one, cervical position dissociation. You're green, but just to kind of touch on it, like if you don't have this general movement of cervical rotation, right, you would probably result in early torso rotation here. Again, I don't think it's an issue just from looking at your video, but I have to further assess to make sure that it's not. But let's say, you know, for a hitter, right, they can't look over their front shoulder, so they're going to open up their stance, right? But for us pitchers, we don't have that luxury, right? We have to stay here, look over our glove side, and then be able to come through. But if you're restricted and you can't look there, what's going to start to come open so you can see where you're throwing it? That torso. So just a little side note there, but that's all I got for the checklist, buddy. So make sure you compile all your questions and be ready for me on our call tomorrow, and we'll talk to you then.